He was forced to become his mother's husband. The most disturbing case ever revealed in the United States. This phrase echoed through the corridors of the Louisville court, Kentucky, in March 1963, when one of the most shocking documented cases of consanguinity in American history came to light. In the depths of the Appalachian Mountains, where geographical isolation created closed communities for generations, the Harrington family had lived in absolute secrecy for over 4 decades. Our understanding of the limits of human degradation would be forever changed by what happened on this 200-acre rural property. In 1943, Thomas Harrington, just 16 years old, was forced by his own father, Jeremiah Harrington, to assume marital responsibilities with his mother, Martha, after the patriarch's premature death in a mining accident. A distorted tradition of maintaining pure lineage is what began this story, but it turned into the most unimaginable nightmare a family could endure. Hidden between century-old oaks, covered hills, and surrounded by a constant mist that seemed to protect its darker secrets, the Harrington property was 15 kilometers from the nearest city, Pineville. There, far from the eyes of society, 3 generations lived under rules created by the family founder, Ezekiel Harrington, who arrived in the region in 1897 obsessed with preserving what he called blood purity. When her husband died in a collapse in the local coal mine in 1943, Martha Harrington, then 34, was trapped by the family traditions imposed by her deceased father-in-law, with 5 children to raise and no financial resources. The eldest son, Thomas, was chosen to assume the role of family protector, a cruel euphemism for what would truly happen over the next 20 years. A shy boy with blue eyes and brown hair, as described by neighbors, young Thomas had no choice. An environment where resistance was impossible was created by the social pressures of the time, combined with geographical isolation and financial dependence. He was forced to accept a union that violated all known social and moral norms. For the early years, the family managed to maintain appearances. While Martha took care of her younger children, Thomas worked on the small family farm, cultivating corn and raising a few head of cattle. To the few neighbors who occasionally visited, they were merely a mother and son struggling to survive after a tragedy. But the truth was far more disturbing. In 1945, Martha gave birth to her first child with Thomas. A girl, named Sarah, was born with severe facial deformities and learning difficulties, physical characteristics like very close eyes, a cleft palate, and compromised mental development that indicated the devastating effects of consanguinity. A boy named David was born in 1947, who developed chronic breathing problems and frequent seizures. The effects of endogamy were manifesting more and more evidently, yet the family remained isolated, without access to appropriate medical care or external guidance. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel to discover other equally disturbing cases that have remained hidden for decades. Stories that society preferred to forget, but which need to be told to understand the limits of human degradation. By 1950, 7 years after the beginning of this forced union, the effects of consanguinity on the Harrington family had become impossible to ignore. Martha, now 41, had given birth to 4 children by Thomas, each with deformities and health problems more severe than the last. The third child, Michael, born in 1949, could never walk properly due to malformations in his lower limbs. His legs were disproportionate to his body and his feet had fused toes, a condition known as syndactyly, common in cases of close consanguineous relationships. Rebecca, the fourth child, was born in 1952 with severe microcephaly. Her significantly smaller head indicated compromised brain development, and she never learned to talk or feed herself, remaining in a vegetative state until her death at just 8 years old. Now 23, Thomas began showing signs of mental deterioration. The psychological weight of his situation, combined with the pressure to support a family under such adverse conditions, was taking its price. He developed episodes of erratic behavior, alternating between periods of absolute silence and explosions of anger directed at his own children. The Harrington property became a scene of progressive isolation. The children rarely left the farm, and when they did, they wore hats and clothes to hide their deformities. Martha had developed a rigid system of control, prohibiting any interaction with strangers and keeping the children busy with housework to prevent them from exploring beyond the property limits. In 1953, the local church pastor, Reverend William Patterson, made an unannounced visit to the Harrington farm. What he found left him deeply disturbed: children with obvious deformities, precarious living conditions, and an atmosphere loaded with tension and fear. While Martha explained the children's conditions as God's will, something in the family's behavior alarmed the religious man. Reverend Patterson noticed a physical resemblance between Thomas and the younger children that was far more pronounced than expected in a half-sibling relationship. The family's characteristic blue eyes appeared more intensely, and certain birthmarks seemed statistically impossible in a normal family. When Rebecca had a seizure during the visit, common in children with severe microcephaly, Reverend Patterson offered medical help, but Martha categorically refused, claiming doctors wouldn't understand the family's special condition. This refusal raised even more suspicions. Local church records indicate that Reverend Patterson tried to visit again in the following months, but always found the family absent or too busy to receive him. The religious community began to murmur about the Harringtons, creating theories about family curses and divine punishments. In 1954, the fifth child, James, was born with the most severe set of deformities yet seen in the family. His hands had only 3 fingers each, he had heterochromia, eyes of different colors, and he developed a cardiac condition that severely limited his physical activities. James rarely cried or showed emotion, remaining in a state of apathy that worried even Martha. A severe drought hit Kentucky in 1958, forcing many rural families to seek government help. Having remained isolated for 15 years, the Harrington family finally had to interact with external authorities when Martha was forced to request food assistance at the Pineville Social Services office. The social worker on the case, Dorothy Mills, a 45-year-old graduate of the University of Louisville, was immediately alert when she saw the Harrington children. Their physical deformities were consistent with patterns of consanguinity she had studied during her academic training. Dorothy noted that Sarah, now 13, had not only facial deformities but also a speech pattern characteristic of severe intellectual disability. David, 11, breathed with difficulty and had frequent fainting episodes. Michael, 9, had difficulty walking, and James, 4, remained completely apathetic throughout the interview. During the routine investigation, Dorothy discovered inconsistencies in the family documents. The birth records of the youngest children listed Thomas as the father, but there was no marriage record for Thomas. When asked about the children's mother, Martha gave contradictory and evasive explanations. Dorothy decided to make unannounced home visits. On her first visit in September 1958, she found Thomas and Martha sharing a room, while the 5 children slept in another room with poor ventilation, a configuration clearly suggesting a marital relationship. Dorothy confronted Martha, who responded with vehement denials and threats that the family would move if persecuted, continued. But the social worker had seen enough to suspect a case of consanguinity and child neglect. It was during this investigation that Dorothy discovered something even more disturbing. Talking to James, the 4-year-old repeated a phrase he had heard from the adults: "Dad Thomas is Mom Martha's brother." This innocent revelation from a child confirmed the social worker's worst suspicions about the true nature of the family relationships. The moment you hear an innocent child repeat words